Okay, it is for assets. What is an asset? Asset is anything that has value. Cash, obviously, is the best type of asset, right? Uh, Land is an asset. Buildings are an asset. Vehicles are an asset. The clothes you are wearing are an asset. This blackboard's an asset. The building I'm in is an asset. Assets, one of the ways I like to think about assets is asset is anything that you can sell on Craigslist. And if you think about Craigslist and everything that is sold, there's a lot that encompasses a lot of things, right? So if you can sell it on Craigslist, it's an asset. If you leave it out front in your front yard and in the morning it's not there and you're sad, that was an asset. All right. So assets can be broken down into tangible assets, things that you can touch, feel, sell, put in a van. Those are tangible assets. Also, we have intangible assets, and intangible assets are assets that you can't touch. Patents, trademark, copyright, goodwill in a business. Those are examples of intangible assets, but you can still sell those things. One of the places where students get confused at is prepaid insurance or prepaid rent. Those are also assets. It's the landlord or the insurance company, in the case of prepaid insurance, they owe you something. You can call up the insurance company and say, hey, I'm canceling AAA, I'm going to Geico, give me my money, and they'll send you a check. All right? So in businesses, the real common one is a cash, accounts receivable. There's someone owes you money. That's an example of an asset. Vehicles, of course, are an asset. Land, buildings, computer equipment, office equipment, and all your prepaids. Those are very, very common, especially in the first accounting classes as far as what assets are. All right, what's a liability? A liability is other people's claims on your assets. In your daily life, your student loans, if you have a student loan, that's a liability. You owe the government or you owe the bank money on your student loan. Credit card debt would be an example of a liability in your daily life. In a business, big liabilities are accounts payable, notes payable, salaries payable. Pretty much with anything with the word payable in it, you can pretty much assume it's a liability. The hard one for a lot of students is unearned revenue is also an example of a liability. How you get unearned revenue is someone has given you money and you are promising to do some work for them in the future. Unearned revenue is an example. Gift card liability is also an example. So if you go into a store and you buy a gift card, that store owes you something. That gift card is a liability to the store. Accounts or revenue accounts are accounts that are for doing the work that you're doing. So if you are a landscaper and you're mowing lawns, that would be landscape service revenue or income. If you are an architect, it's architectural plan design income. If you are doing work as an attorney and you are doing legal services, that's legal services income or legal services revenue. Income and revenue can be used interchangeably in this particular instance. Service businesses is going to be called either service revenue or fees earned is also another example of an income account. In a merchandising business where you're selling things, the income account is going to be called sales. Capital accounts are the accounts that are left over for the owner or owners. In a sole proprietorship or a partnership, it's going to have the name of the owner or owners, comma, capital. So if it's a sole proprietorship and David Perone owned the business, it would be David Perone, comma, capital would be an example of the capital account. Another type of capital account is called the drawing account, and a drawing account is when an owner pulls money out of the business for themselves, right? And so a drawing account is a type of capital account. Specifically, it's a contra capital account because it's like an anti-capital account. Still type of a capital account. There's really only in it two. So in a sole proprietorship or partnership, it's going to be the owner's name, comma, capital, or the owner's name, comma, drawing are going to be the names of the account. In a corporation, the capital accounts are retained earnings and dividends. That's again what's left over for the owners. Retained earnings account is an example of a capital account, And dividends is an example of a contra capital account relating to a corporation. What is an expense? An expense is the cost to do something, or it can also be defined as a reduction of an asset's value. So in accounting, the big expenses are rent expense and salaries expense, utilities expense, insurance expense. Those are examples of expenses. They all have the word expense in them. Where an asset is actually going down in value, that would be something like depreciation expense. As you use up a particular asset, the value of that asset goes down, and that's called depreciation expense. The big ones in financial accounting are, again, rent expense, usually a really big expense for a business. Salaries expense is also usually pretty big if you have employees. Utilities expense, maybe telephone expense, supplies expense. Pretty much with the word, anything with the word expense in it is going to be an expense account. Depreciation expense is also an example of an expense. The only kind of little caveat is a prepaid expense. For example, prepaid rent is an example of a prepaid expense account. Prepaid expense is not an expense account, it's actually an asset account because you have some value in the future. And we talked about that when we talked about assets. Prepaid rent or prepaid insurance, you can call up the insurance company and get your money back. That's an example of an asset. So even though it has the word expense in it, in that particular case, if it has the word prepaid in it, or prepaid expense, or prepaid rent expense, it is not an expense account, but instead an asset account. And that's the only kind of place where it's a little bit tricky. Other than that, if it has the word expense in it, rent expense, salaries expense, utilities expense, supplies expense, depreciation expense, it is definitely an expense.